we going live. Yes, yes, yes. Education is elevation. Y'all see who we got in the building. Cultural icon. Talking about not only cultural icon, somebody here that's really doing the work. We know it's a lot of folks in Hollywood that know how to, that's been in Hollywood that know how to talk it, but when it come to walking, it's real wobbly and all over the place and things like that. So what I know for somebody that's been sitting back watching what's going on, Erika Alexander has been doing the work. So without further ado, you know what I'm saying, I want to just let you introduce yourself, because I know a lot of times people pigeonhole you into just talking about Maxine and Living Color, but I know you have a beautiful canon of work. So if you just, you know what I'm saying, let us know. Let us know.
Okay. Well, my name is Erika Alexander, Erika Rosa Alejandro, for people who out there who speak the speech. I am originally from Arizona. That's where I was born. I was raised partially in Philadelphia. That's where I was discovered. And I went on to work in New York and Los Angeles, where I live now. And I consider myself a citizen of the world because I've traveled so much and had to as a young actress. And then also I spend so much time going around doing whatever work there is. So obviously on sets, I'm often filming, whether it's in Toronto or here in the US, New York, Atlanta, all these places. And then as a surrogate, I was a surrogate for quite some time for Hillary Clinton. I'm her most traveled surrogate. So she sent me all over the United States and also to Africa to learn about systems, to learn about the world, women, these types of things. And so that's who I am. So yes, I'm an actress, but I'm also a director and a producer. I produced John Lewis Good Trouble. There he is behind me.
Yeah.
With my co-founder of Color Farm Media, Ben Arnon, and also just recently producer of The Big Payback, which is on PBS app. Everybody go take a look at it. But we've been going around talking a lot about that. And then also I'm also the producer of Finding Tamika and creator writer in that space with James T. Green, Charlemagne the God, and Kevin Hart. Finding Tamika is about Tamika Houston, who went missing in South Carolina in 2005. And we did a neo-noir Audible series, 10-episode series about her with her auntie, Rebecca Howard, and other partners. So I'm
South
all
Carolina.
over. Yeah, there you go.
South Carolina seems like it's a weird place, man. In the past 2 weeks, I've learned a lot about South Carolina, a lot about University of Clemson, a lot about this Murdoch family, and then what you just mentioned right there, man, it sounds like South Carolina going on a lot. But you just mentioned something though that I feel like I've never heard before, and I think maybe people in the audience is not either. What, when you say you were a surrogate for Hillary Clinton, what does that mean? What were you doing exactly?
Well, people traditionally know surrogates to do things like carry babies for other people. You can't have babies for whatever reason or that type of thing. So in a way, when you're a surrogate for a candidate, in her case, for her 2007 run for president and also her 2016 run for president, I was one of the people that would go around and in her stead show up and be able to ask questions, speak on her behalf, but through my own filter. So that's the part. If there was an MSNBC interview, they might send a surrogate. A surrogate is not just some pundit that comes and talks about it. They speak on behalf of the candidate. In a way, I'm carrying partially her baby. And I'm always conscious of that if I'm doing things like that, whether it's for Stacey Abrams or Ayanna Pressley or people that, I might admire and come on as a surrogate. I was a surrogate at one point for a very short run for that Kamala Harris was running. Because they know that you're going to learn their resume and the facts. You're going to be asked hard questions, and you have to deliver. But you also have to stand up for yourself and talk about the candidate through your own experience.
Man, that's very interesting. Actually, I did not know that. We're gonna add that to the other things that I'm now knowledgeable that you do. That's smooth, actually. You talked about it though. The PBS app, us getting into the big paycheck and the conversation of reparations.
Big paycheck we're after, but it's called the Big Payback. But we really I would like a big paycheck. It probably won't come in that. So we'll talk about the types of things that might be surrounding reparations. And obviously, as Martin Luther King said, he said, we come into Washington to get our check, which is a lot of people think about it in that way. But the Big Payback is the film that we did co-directed with Whitney Dow. Whitney Dow is a white co-director. He did Two Towns of Jasper. He's a documentarian for a long time. He's also a professor at Columbia, and he did something called the Whiteness Project years ago, and sort of making his way talking about whiteness in a space that most people may feel uncomfortable. He's trying to make it comfortable for white people to talk about what it is to be white and why whiteness matters to them or how they see it.
Yeah. So with y'all two doing it together, me being able to see the film, I feel like it was very thought-provoking, very thought-provoking from start to finish. So before we get into like what reparations is or kind of what the film got into, what are some common misconceptions about reparations that you used to hearing?
Tons. Frankly, most people think of reparations as just money or a check. And that's really the tip of the iceberg. If we think about reparations in a classic sense, we might be thinking about how they give reparations to the Japanese internment, people that they put into these concentration camps because they were Japanese and we were fighting World War II and they didn't trust them. So suddenly they rounded up American citizens who were Japanese and felt justified putting them in these camps. And then they thought better of it afterwards and they gave them reparations, and everybody should look it up. That's a partial way to think of reparations. You might think of the indigenous Americans here, and I call them Americans because they're indigenous to this country, whatever they were before people called this America. And so much was taken from them, their lives, their land, everything. But then if you look, there were times that they would create treaties. And even though they backpedaled on many of these treaties, that was a form of reparations for them to give them land, a sovereignty, that type of thing. For the Germans who massacred the Jewish community and their citizens in Germany, Germany still pays reparations to the Jewish community still, and they should, because they wiped out whole families and whole communities and millions of them. What we're talking about with this is America paying the people who were enslaved and the descendants of, and not only for that, but the Jim Crow and the racist policies that followed thereafter, for illegally targeting Black people and making them third-class citizens in their own country. And so how do we talk about that? Not just money sense, program sense, housing sense, criminal justice, all these things to really target and say we owe these people more than an apology without conditions, which we have not gotten so far, but we also owe them repair and restitution and targeted, focus in whatever way to make good on all the harms that we've done to this particular block of citizens.
Yeah. And something else that I really appreciated by watching the Big Payback, not paycheck, Big Payback, was how it did this. I felt like a historical analysis, and it walked us through kind of how the conversations for Black people and reparations have changed. I'm curious though, for you specifically, how has the conversations of reparations changed from how when you was growing up to kind of now in 2023?
I didn't hear much about reparations back in the day when I was growing up. It's funny you should say that. So I grew up in Arizona. Let me tell a little bit about my origin story.
Please do, Arizonan.
Not people think, nothing's in Arizona except for Waiting to Exhale. If you were Angela Bassett, they set that film was set in Arizona, and people think just desert, but there's also mountains. Arizona is a big state, and there's a lot of people from the Southwest, not only Texas, but Arizona, New Mexico. And I was born in Arizona, in Winslow, Arizona, which is a very small town, and raised partially in Flagstaff, Arizona. And so, what was the question?
Yeah.
So I didn't hear anything about reparations in that way. I heard a lot about the reservations and that type of thing. But for even the Navajo Hopi, I went to school with them, and also Mexican children, but also German Lutherans. And we talked about a lot of things having to do with culture, but it was usually around celebrating culture, tribal dress, those types of things. But not about reparations. The first time I started hearing about reparations in a real way was from Spike Lee when he named his company 40 Acres and a Mule. And everyone knows that 40 Acres and a Mule is sort of a proxy for standing for reparations at all. And by that time, I was in Philadelphia. Everybody wanted to be Spike Lee. They wanted to be Robert Townsend. They wanted to be
Yeah.
these really amazing filmmakers. And Spike Lee had the coolest name. And we started talking about, like, yeah, give me my 40 acres and a mule. But the truth is, it comes from a real thing. Sherman's Special Order 15, when General Sherman was asked to address this by President Abraham Lincoln to see would they do with all these citizen or these, they weren't citizens, they were like
Newly freed
newly
subjects.
freed, yeah, people that had not, they didn't have a country, they didn't have a state, they didn't have anything. What do we do with them? And they thought they would make a way with this order to give them land, and then by that way, 40 acres, no more than 40 acres, and for some a mule. So that's when I started to hear about that. But up until that point, nothing.
In like around, so this like would have been like the early 90s or earlier.
Early 90s, definitely the early 90s. Yes, definitely.
Early 90s. And when do you say would be kind of like the turning point that made it where you want to kind of have a passion project that was able to just explore the history of reparations? I'm definitely curious to that. Like, what was it that made you be like, you know what? I want to put some time, some effort, and some energy into actually compiling a team and really dealing with the issue of reparations on film.
Yeah, I wish life was like that, where you just have a eureka moment, like, yo, I need to put something on film, like, a reparations documentary. Woo, let's do that. Not at all. It was one of those things where we were doing the John Lewis Project, and part of it, shout out to Don Porter, who was the fantastic director of that. And you start to see the systemic issues that keep coming up all over the place. And there's all sorts of energy that goes anytime these things happen. You start to think, well, what's the tie that binds? It's not just our blackness and their whiteness and cruelty and our lack of power in spaces to move it forward. But there's also the fact that it was never really addressed as something that needed to be organic or holistic to a people, to say, have we ever really helped them outside of specific small programs or giving them civil rights, which is something that comes with ordinary citizenship? Have we ever really said, you know what? There's so many things going to these 13% of Black Americans. How is it they keep getting overpowered by all these things? And if you do, then you start thinking, reparations. We
Right.
need to look at what we've done and repair. So that's like truth and reconciliation, like they did in South Africa. When Mandela got out, he said, like Abraham Lincoln, in a way, he was like, we need to come together and make a new country. And it won't work if we just hate the whites, the European whites that had oppressed them. What could they do to bring about a different change? So they had truth and reconciliation hearings, and you can ask how successful that was, but I thought that was smart. We're not in a Black country, they were.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we always have to depend on the kindness of strangers. And when I say strangers, strangers are our own people, they're in our blood. And yet we're still asking for something that I think that anyone would ask if they had been done this type of wrong for so long.
Yeah, and I think this is where we start to get a little bit critical. You feel me? I think that when I think about how I've been taught about anti-Black violence and about how Black people experience violence, I feel like I'm taught it as a natural process that the world has to take. In order for you to get the 6, you got to go through 4 and 5, Erika. In order for us to get the Monday, we got to go through this day and this day and this day. In order for you and I to be able to enjoy the cell phones and enjoy social media, Black people had to suffer. And to me, when I was watching the film, it was a few people that kind of provide that pushback. how do you feel about that analysis before I ask the follow-up question?
About the analysis of what? Us having to suffer in order
Yes.
to exist in this space?
Yeah, like, yeah. In order to get to 6, we gotta go to 4 and 5. In order to get the cell phones, we gotta have black folks struggle. In order for us to be able to get this, we gotta have. Does that sound fair?
It sounds very unfair. I mean, it doesn't sound fair to me. If I'm understanding it right, that we'd have to suffer it all to have what I think is a human rights issue. Um, I, 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 I can't speak for how everyone sees this, but to me, it's a matter of moral rightness, and the conversation should be about not about money or land or any of this until we start to really think about um, the moral conversation around this. And so I'm just hoping that um, there are moral conversations. There's a monetary obligation toward the least of these. It turns out the least of these are people that have been targeted to stay the least of these. We can talk about why those systems work at all, but we can't just stop with African Americans. If we talked about that, we have to talk about poor whites and other people of
Yeah.
color. This continuation of what Reverend Martin Luther King called uh, and was trying to address when he got shot was the Poor People's Campaign, which is what
Yeah.
Reverend Barber is doing in North Carolina. And I believe in the creation of at least eventually fusion politics, and that's uniting marginalized communities. So do we have to go through this before we get to that? I don't know. All I know is that the march of righteousness in men and in all humans, is that the oppressed create leverage and rightness and campaigns for them to be unoppressed. And then what happens is there a shift often, and then a new hierarchy is created, and
Yeah.
we're fighting again. And we don't seem to ever get out of that. So maybe as if you're a believer in religion, they say the poor will always be with us. And so here we are in this position right now.
Here we
I
are.
have to say, Joe Gill gives a hello to you. That's my friend, and he's a fantastic comic book and graphic novelist, artist. And anyway, so I meant to say that before. Hi, Joe, if
Yeah.
you're out there. Shout
Yeah.
out.
Shout out to Joe. Shout out to Joe. So when you was talking, there's something I was thinking about, because you talked about morality. And you know me, I'm a Southerner. I feel like being a Southerner, I'm always thinking about the way in which Black folks deal with racial pathology, how we are pathologized for being lazy, and how a lot of times us being seen as being lazy is seen as being immoral. So when I think about reparations, I think about the conversation being like, hey, Black folks being lazy, they want to benefit from something that didn't happen to them, and they have to get over it. How was it dealing with that particular aspect of reparations when putting together this film? I know I watched this, so I know y'all dealt with it. So I'm just curious for you personally, like, how was it dealing with that part?
Well, people are ignorant, so they're gonna always see Black people as lazy, but that's the branding around us. That's a branding thing. One of the things we say at Color Farm Media is that we want to rebrand Blackness. If you can be branded a N-word, you can be branded something else. Now, if you look at historically whether Black people are lazy, we built this country. So there's an absolute, and that's not.
Misconception, empirical, false, lying. You lying. Stop lying.
It's a straight not only lie, it's a distortion of grand proportion. If you were enslaved and then out of that turned into the servant, and you couldn't come late, you had to stay late, you had to come early. Jesse Jackson said we took the early bus. It's really disgusting to be seen as having those issues now and saying, oh, what about your work ethic? Who are they to say anything to us about work ethic? And then they took the jobs completely from us and created a pipeline to prison, and or gave us the worst jobs in the world at the worst pay. And who wants to be early for that? But you were also competing against new immigrants that were coming in to supplant all Americans, especially African Americans, in those low paying jobs. I'm part of movement, and I shouldn't say a movement, but talking about one fair wage, it's just going around speaking about the low wages that people get. And sometimes it's as low as $2.15 as a tipped wage worker. Now that comes from slavery, and if you ask Saru Jayaraman, who works on this, who's an activist, uh, she'd say all of these things that are systemic that haunt other people's lives, whether it's single women, um, mothers, I don't know, all sorts of people. I guess if you're immigrant and you don't speak the language, you're taking tipped wages, and that's from slavery. There's all sorts of stuff. So I mean, yeah.
Hey, my mind wandering now. Listen, my mind then took off. My mind then took off so far, and we already talked about. You said, "Hey, be yourself now," and I'm gonna be myself. And this, so listen, we talking about wages, and I told you I think that cultural appropriation is a part of the conversation of reparations. Now, in terms of wages, you know I'm going there. In terms of wages, and thinking about the cultural productions of Living Single, the hit single, We Are Living, hey, versus Friends, life was gonna be this way. Is it a fair statement to say that the main beneficiaries of Friends owe reparations to some people that had to do with living single? Is that a fair declaration to make?
It depends on who you're asking. If you're asking people, that made that show, they'd be like, "No, we did that on our own," and perhaps that's how they always see it. But there is something to say that there is a program that existed that had the same format and recipe in it, that was on the same network, and that then a different program with a different name was created, and on the same network, got the real sort of oomph. And next thing you know, you have Friends and there's Living Single and that type of thing. Listen, that happens all the time. And I know it's fun to talk about, but um, Black people have been first so many times and been culturally appropriator, or is that misappropriate, or is that appropriate? How do you say that?
Man, I feel like you say both of them, appropriation and misappropriation.
Okay. So, look at jazz, look at rock and roll, look at all these things that we've created and who got rich off of it, who got the best sort of shake off of it. Image, IP, lost, generational wealth, stolen, um, and redesigned and reconfigured. I mean, playing banjos come from Africa. Africa's a banjo, all these things that we brought in, food, everything, and get no credit for it. That is not only sad, it's wicked, because that doesn't tell the story of America. So yeah, you could make that and say, yeah, there's a case to be made there. I know that on Black Twitter, they'll go in, if you say something about Friends and Living Single, and that's what it is. And I've certainly had my dust ups, and I've tried to be as kind as possible. It's a different thing for me to say it than other people. But all I know is that it happens all the time, and we're not outside of, that.
Yeah, hey, this part right here, I don't even have a question for this one. I got more of a statement, and you can reply how you know what I'm saying. But for the people that's watching this, I think that Erika hit on something very, very, very important. A lot of us become captive, I feel like, to what's been happening along right now, and we believe that the way in which Black people have our dances, or have our music, or have our cultural words get stolen from us on the internet, we believe that the way we get used and abused on the internet is unique to being on the internet. I think that what Erika is pointing out right here, that whether we're talking about 90s sitcom show or we're talking about the Chuck Berry and rock and roll, we can recognize there's something unique about what Black people create and how the rest of the world kind of believes they can do with it as they please. Which brings us back to this conversation of reparations. It brings us back to the conversation of reparations. How do you feel when people say in order for us to get reparations that we first have to do a financial literacy class, or that we have to have these different prerequisites in order for us to get the reparations? I know people think differently, so I'm just curious how you feel.
I think that's absurd. Because it's sort of saying you are children and wards of the state. And if you get this money, you're going to have to be watched. You can't make your own decisions. Let me tell you something. If you believe that something is owed to a person and you give it back to them, or you make a way for them to have a path to it, then you're not there to design what they do with it afterwards. If they want to blow it on anything they want, cars, whatever, rims, education, anything, it's none of their business as far as I'm concerned. Now, that's a personal opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that if we have a way and a path to some kind of monetary reparation in that space, then it would be right for us as a community to get ready and prepare ourselves to make good decisions so we don't just give it right back into the system that has oppressed us, and we create a way to support entrepreneurs and those types of things. But I don't think anybody outside of our community should be able to tell us what to do with it.
Yeah, I agree with you.
How we can't manage it, the funds or the programs ourselves.
Oh yeah, and when you was talking about like indigenous sovereignty, it made me think about the what was it called, the Osage murders, where pretty much during the land run or during the Trail of Tears, American government sent a lot of the 5 civilized tribes to parts of Oklahoma that they felt was like worthless. It had no value. Well, in the 1920s, they discovered that this land was sitting on one of the greatest oil deposits here in the country, and it made the Osage Nation one of the richest counties in the country. It's called the Osage Murders because over, let's say, 8 years, a whole tribe got wiped out and made it where individuals of a European descent became the people that owned the deeds to the land and the deeds to the oil. And what it made me think of is that during that time, the United States federal government tried to help the Native American people, specifically the Osage Nation, by saying they had to have guardians. And what we've seen is that the United States federal government was almost able to facilitate the financial exploitation of Native American children, because it's what they were like. Literally, it's like, hey, you Native kids, y'all don't have the financial aptitude to be able to handle y'all money. So I'm going to put a poor white person.
Right. Y'all are too simple-minded to understand what's going on. So, what we're looking at and you're talking about is just, it's Jim Crow. It's white supremacy. It's terrorism. It's another way to lynch, kill, and murder people that are in the way of what a system that's based on white superiority does. It's also about capitalism. It's a capitalist system. I mean, white people did not want African Americans free or not to own anything. So they're not going to stop after that. And they're certainly not going to stop terrorizing the indigenous people if they find something that they want. And they did a damn good job preventing any advancement or implementation of a bill, a law, policy, anything to help them, including instituting Jim Crow laws, white supremacy, terrorism, lynching, outright stealing is what you're talking about, but mostly destroying any advancement of those people, and that includes our people, for decades. And so that's why you see the Great Migration. That's from the South to the North. That took place, trying to get out from underneath that immoral white boot and that targeted destruction that you're talking about, the oppression toward enslaved people. And yet you can't outrun it. We found out you can't outrun it. If you went to Queen Mother Moore talked about how they went first to Los Angeles and found that was worse than the conditions in New Orleans. And they went to Chicago, worse. Then they said, go to Harlem, just as bad. And she was in a space where her father had died. And she even talks about how her brother kicked them out. She says, oh, your brother's going to take care of you. And then the brother kicked her and her sisters out. And there she was trying to be a maid and being raped, she said, by a white man, and who again, they were making Black women down there tie their hairs and scarves because they said you were trying to seduce the men. Trying to get out from underneath that. Let me tell you something. Over and over again, we have these horror stories. And instead of horror stories, we would like to change the narrative and talk about victory stories. And this is an opportunity for white people and brown people and everyone who calls themselves American to join what I call, I don't call it, forgive me, but what Reverend Barber calls the third Reconstruction. And the third Reconstruction is, anybody understands history, the first Reconstruction being just after slavery, and that ended when white people came home and Andrew, it was it Jackson? Yeah.
Well, yeah, definitely. It was,
Yeah.
man, I want to get me started. I'm trying.
Well, and then MLK's assassination, that's the end of the second Reconstruction. Civil
Yep.
Rights Bill got signed. And so maybe perhaps we're in the third Reconstruction. And that gives us an opportunity to say, well, what can happen in this space? Because we're still dealing with that. Look at George Floyd. Look at Ahmaud Arbery. Look at all the things that are happening
All these stuff.
over again. And every time the band stretches, it always goes bang back. It wants to go back to its default position. But what we need to do is have a great disruptor and say, we're not going to let that rubber band just flap back. We're not going to create something where we're waiting for the people in power or white people or white allies to do the right thing en masse. We're going to make it an obligation of the American government to say, you have not yet done what is right. And America can't be America without this. And in fact, just as James Baldwin say, if they can't be part of it, they will wreck it.
Definitely. I know in this conversation, we've talked a lot about reparations on a federal level. Something that I really, really appreciated about the film that was really thought-provoking is thinking about reparations on the state and local level. And that sister from Evanston, Illinois, when I say she was cooking every time she came on the screen, I was like, let me get out my notes and take out some stuff. I'm just curious. First, two things. How would you define reparations? So I know at this point we've been talking for 30 minutes. We haven't necessarily kind of came out and gave full context. So when we say reparations, this is what we mean. And then what was it like having? I know you talked to her. What's it like talking to, you know what I'm saying, or listening to her speak, the sister from Evanston? Man.
Well, reparations, as defined in the dictionary, is the making of amends for a wrong one has done by paying for or helping those who have been wronged. That's a very simple thing. And that's what people need to know, but it's also a matter of justice in this case. We're not asking for charity. Anybody that's advocating for it is not asking for you to give them anything. They are saying we are owed this, and you must now find a way to create a path to wholeness. And so that's what reparations is. Robin Bruce Simmons is one of the new leaders that has emerged in this. It's what the film is partly about. In a great way, we wanted to create a film that I think, we really liked the 13th, which was what the sister, that's my friend, Ava.
Ava Direct,
and do something like that. But then we pivoted when we realized that there was an opportunity to do a movie about actual history being made. One of our producers, Zan Parker, called us one morning and said, I saw this article. There's this woman, an older woman in Evanston, Illinois, named Robin Bruce Simmons. And she just passed the first tax-funded reparations bill for Black residents in her city in American history. And so we jumped on a plane the next day, got there, and was able to film. If you go see the film, was able to film that historic meeting where they all get together and not only say that this is done, but acknowledge her. And that's where we start the film. And everybody can go see it again on the app, PBS, so you can see what I'm talking about. And we made a film about history. And we followed this woman who was about #solutions only. She said, listen, we talk about the problems all the time, but what about the solutions? And she thought to herself, reparations. And then she was mentored by not only people who had been in the fight for these types of things in Cobra and I don't know, there's many, grassroots organizations, but also people who had been in their city council. It was a mostly white city council that passed it, just so people know. And that's what the movie is about.
And the reason why I brought up Robin in Evanston and Illinois uniquely, because I usually filter everything that I feel like I see through my Southern experience. And what became so evident to me is that a lot of our country is really lost in the sauce of regionalism when it comes to thinking about anti-Black violence, especially historically speaking. You feel me? Illinois is not below the Mason-Dixon line. Illinois is not seen as a state, you feel me, that is historically a slave state. But we still can acknowledge that historically speaking, the way in which that city and in many instances the way that state has been brought up is still on the backs of slave labor. So just kind of what were some things that you were able to uncover in thinking about specifically reparations in Illinois and how it relates to like the North versus the South conversation? Because I know that California also doing something about reparations as well.
Sure, and they all do. So a lot of people think they're divorced from having a reparations conversation because they'll say, oh, there weren't no slaves here. That's not true. There were slaves all around. And we're talking about the spoils of war. What happened is that if slavery is fueling America's economy, then your cities were built off of that too. And that doesn't nullify whether it's in the North or the South where you were, whether there's a commitment or should be a commitment to pay reparations. But here's what we all experience now. And it's important that this is why this is called the United States of America and not the United States of Illinois. 2020 is a great clarifier because of COVID-19, because of George Floyd, as I mentioned before, Ahmaud Arbery, because of the insurrection, because of poverty, the Fight for 15, which I mentioned, which is about wages. I could get on, but it's a sign of the times that reparations is a remedy or could be a remedy for the wrongs that are committed to African Americans. And so
Today.
That's right. And in that we're talking about it now and just saying, what states did what is not the correct way to think about this. This is an issue of a nation.
Yeah. Hey, and this the part right here where I start getting a little bit of sprinkling a little edutainment. You know what I'm saying? We know that in these days, being woke is weaponized, is trivialized for being divisive. But we recognize that originally, I got the snoring playing because I recognize that folks want us to stay asleep. And in us staying asleep, we stay unaware of the political, social, and economic implications that deal with today. I was born in 1990, December 9th. I've lived through the war on drugs. Both of my parents have been incarcerated in my life as a result of the war on drugs. When I'm watching the film and I see, play the snoring sound again, when I see people like Mitch McConnell talking about we shouldn't give things to people that didn't experience it, and then they bring up the crime bill that Joe Biden did, and they acknowledge it was passed in my lifetime, I'm not sure what it means to say these people want to be paid for something they never experienced. I ain't even got no question. I just thought it was a great moment to get that out of my chest. You know what I'm saying? Stay woke.
That's right.
Stay woke.
I know that's right. And yet there's levels of understanding even to that. If we look at even the crime bill, and I'm not here to argue for or against it, that's not it. But Black people also asked for that because there was such a rampage on our communities with them having allowed drugs in from the 70s and 80s. And then Bill Clinton shows up, and one of the things that people are begging for is law and order. Black people wanted it. They were being plagued by the lawlessness that it had spawned, and it sure being perpetuated by Black people. But the biggest crime was the thing that they allowed to unleash on Black people so they could make money for their wars. And it's so difficult to have these conversations and try to apply blame. When I said the entire thing is blamed on the fact that if you keep targeting people who you see as being disposable and expendable, that will just keep going on in different versions of it. Look at this man down in Florida. He wants to get rid of Black studies if you don't do it a certain way. It's all he's doing is running for president. And all we're doing is either acknowledging that or not. I think that, to me, I don't listen to it that way. I say, what can distract us? What can distract us right now? What can we get really hot about as opposed to focusing on how we can unify ourselves? Again, through fusion politics, gain strength and start to implement legislation and bills that can change the conditions on the ground. And the rest is the big circus tent. But off on these other um, spaces, there's real activists and active advocates doing work. There's real people in positions of power, whether it's state senate and council people that are doing work. And you have to figure out who's doing the work and how you will support them. And in the meantime, you have to create change every day in your life where you stay, as you say, woke, you wake up. But also, it's no good to stay woke and tweet. You got to get out there on them streets.
Oh, hey, that's to be on a t-shirt right there. No need to stay woke and tweet. You gotta be in the streets. That hey, you
Get out there in the streets. Get on the streets. That's right.
you might got one right there. Definitely. You know,
I'll buy it.
Made me think of something else though, right?
Yeah.
We must acknowledge that there were a lot of Black people in the Black community, you feel me, and outside of the Black community that advocated for legislation like, you know what I'm saying, the crime bills. To me, it makes me think about a philosophy that I came across in college called Afro-pessimism, and just about how the entire world, almost in many instances, has an insatiable appetite for anti-Black violence, even Black people. So to me, when I think about reparations, I'm thinking about how it's not about left versus right or red versus blue or Democrat versus Republican, but about how whether we're talking about the East Coast, the West Coast, or the Midwest, or we're talking about the Black community, the Latin community, or the white community, is something very consistent with white over Black, light over dark, and how particular people are met with violence. I think that a lot of times we have conversations about politics and it's automatically pushed into a conversation about the left versus the right, or even a conversation about in the community and outside the community. And we don't really acknowledge, I feel like, how anti-Blackness is very structural. You feel what I'm saying? Before Nipsey Hussle got murdered, he talked about, hey, I might see somebody that look like me, that talk like me, that dress like me. I'm gonna be more inclined to knocking their face off that, you know what I'm saying, off their shoulders for looking at me wrong than I am a white person. To me, he's speaking that what Tupac, you know what I'm saying, and Juice got it, and Bishop. Hey, as soon as I say you ain't nothing, then you know what I mean? So to me, I think it's a conversation that we have to have about how a lot of us can either A, internalize anti-Blackness, or B, unknowingly facilitate our own, you feel me, structural violence. You know what I'm saying? And I know that's a conversation that's hard to be had, and it's one that's gonna be, you know, feelings gonna be hurt, people toes gonna get stepped on. But I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. You know what I'm saying? Especially in the conversation about reparations. That's it. I ain't even ask how you feel about that. Like that is what that is.
To me, what you're talking about is what's an organic sustainability after you. I mean, obviously, you're talking about if you've been brainwashed all these years, you're really just acting out what the people who programmed you wanted to do. But we have to decide, just decide, how can I step away from this? I don't have to exist in this space. What can we do now? If we were never to get reparations, what could happen now to strengthen our minds and start to turn around this horrendous hundreds of years of destruction of even an image, how we see ourselves, and that's education. That's education.
Agreed.
That's us.
Education is
elevation. That's right. Having the conversation about our children just tuning into their phones and us getting books to them and conversations and after school programs. And if you look at what the Panthers were trying to do back in the day, they were trying to disrupt that and show them a different way. The whole idea of being young, gifted, and Black. I first heard that when I was in a Philadelphia school in 8th grade at Leeds Junior High. And they said, we are young, gifted, and Black. And I was like, what? We are? And then we stood for the Negro Black Anthem or whatever they call it at the time. Because honestly, I hadn't heard of it. I was like, Negro Black Anthem? What's that? Lift
every voice in. Yeah.
What? It was, to me, it opened my eyes like, I never knew but that was being in a Black context for the first time in my life. It's not that my mother and father didn't teach us that. It's just I never saw it embraced in that way. And so it gave me a sense of myself that put steel in my spine and said, your brain is gold and your thoughts matter. And you'll see that in some of the first characters I played, even though I was playing a foster child and a slave and then say a prostitute. I was trying to play them with the acknowledgement of a greater self that was inside of me. I couldn't change the outside version of what they wanted me to play because that's mostly what they were giving us. And I know that Viola Davis talked about it when she was talking about the help and how difficult it is to continue to do those things. But no one can say that she didn't play that with divine dignity. You know, no one. I mean, that's what she brings inside of. So it's again, it's the projection of self outside these roles and how we see ourselves. And when I see brothers and sisters out on the street talking a certain way and the way they have to show out sometime, I'm like, that's a person who so wants to be seen. And what if we were going around saying, sister, you got excellent, you got a really great voice box. We could use you over it. Let's see how we can turn that into something that is more, it has more power. Because right now it's creating disempowerment around you. And maybe people would see that as like, well, why can't we be this? I said, we have, but that's not keeping it real. It's not allowing people to just be who they are. When you look, you talked about, I'm going to talk about this with you.
Let's do it.
Politics of respectability. I want to know a little bit about it if you say that, because part of what that meant back in the day when it was Malcolm X and Baldwin was that there was a way that you had to present yourself for people to take you seriously. And the first thing they wanted you to know, even if you looked at their shoes and didn't think that they were new or whatever, that whatever was coming out of their mouth, that they knew how to speak. They were trying so very hard to shrug off that I know you know what you did. They were trying to portray us as dumb all the time and powerless. And so what is it that you think about the politics of respectability now? Because that's kind of what I'm talking about.
I think that the respectability politics now kind of operate the same as it did with James Baldwin and when Malcolm X was speaking. I just think that now a lot of people in our society, especially Black people, have become more critical about how we appeal to different standards that kind of the dominant class speak, you know what I'm saying, kind of want us to. So to me, how I view respectability politics is me being able to show my humanity to mainstream by picking up their different standards and picking up their different morals and picking up their different ethics. I.e., if I don't use profanity, if I pull my pants up, if I, wear a tie, they'll be able to have respect for me. And how I think about it is it's almost something that perpetuates anti-Black violence, because it literally glosses over how we have brothers being hung in three-piece suits. It glosses over how there's something about anti-Blackness that doesn't really care about how you articulate yourself or doesn't really care how you present yourself. And to me, I think it almost sometimes in most instances kind of gives put the onus of oppression onto the oppressed. I.e., hey, listen, if y'all want the police to stop killing on y'all, go and emulate your humanity the exact way the Europeans say you should. And to me, it kind of showed, hey, whether we're talking about Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, it doesn't matter in many different instances how your resistance came off. Whether it was nonviolent or self-defense, both of those were seen as a threat, not because the existence of self, but because they were Black. So for me, it's not about me being able to talk, I got 3 degrees. It's not me being able to go to the White House and have on a traditional suit. It's not me. To me, it's specifically about my body and about how that body is situated. And it has nothing to do with respectability. That's how I think about it. The last time I end the rant is thinking about like this. When I read about Oprah Winfrey being stereotyped in an antique shop in Switzerland, or I read about Dr. Henry Louis Gates, the world-renowned professor at Harvard, being stereotyped, to me, respectability politics is thrown out the window. And to me, it kind of shows that they fall dead when it comes to being able to present against anti-Black violence, and it only becomes an excuse. I didn't kill you because you was Black. I didn't stereotype you because you was Black. It's because your pants was hanging out and your butt was hanging out. No, it wasn't because you don't speak perfect English diction. The way you speak Ebonics made it where I don't think you should be able to have that. And to me, that's like my pushback against respectability politics. And of course, I can keep on going, but that's how I push back from it, honestly. And that's why I don't really rock with it.
Yeah, well, I also think that it's a canard because it doesn't matter. They will, and envy is if you're walking, no, don't matter. If you're walking around with a three-piece suit, just as you say, that you are as much as a target as somebody who has their pants hanging down. The thing is that it's how we see ourselves. Because ultimately, it's the great Toni Morrison to say to take their gaze away from us, and then ask us how we want to present ourselves. And if you look at it, Black Panther, the film, is a huge respectability image.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know, like festival. If you look at how Black Panther walked, you know, you would never see his pants down. But then you have Killmonger, who he left in the hood, meaning his father, and he comes in and says, "Yeah, but weren't you supposed to come back for me? Weren't you, if you were living in this society, supposed to protect me?" And that's why they have such a great battle, because to me, one of them saying, "Here I am, a king." And of course, but a king made the decision to leave his brothers and sisters out in the cold and not give them the keys to success that can make their days and their lives better. And I believe that how we see ourselves, image matters. I'm in the image business. And all I know is that we can hope and want that people see past how we dress and talk, but that's exactly what doesn't happen. I think that if you're in position of power, it doesn't matter how you dress or talk, because they say, they're not checking for you. They're not coming for you.
Definitely.
But I do think that we often dismiss how powerless we are.
Yeah.
We don't embrace some of the things that make it a little, I don't know, that create better conditions for our success.
Yeah. For sure. The two things. First thing is I would make a productive distinction between respectability politics, and like respectability. Recognizing that we can have respectability for one another that has nothing to do with reaffirming the dominant idea of what it means to be human. To me, I can show respect to somebody in my community without being able to dictate what Toni Morrison talking about in terms of putting that white gaze on them. You feel me? I think it's important to recognize that white people, white supremacy does not corner the market on showing humans respect. But there is a distinction between respectability politics and how we think about who should get what, when, where, and how based off finances or policy in terms of how we see individuals being respectable for like access or resources or opportunity. You see what I'm saying? And we know that respectability, you feel me, can be shown in different instances by this being able to respect one's personhood. I would argue that respectability politics is not something. It is one that says your personhood always can be negotiated insofar how you conform to these standards. But because you didn't brought up T'Challa in Wakanda, and we having a conversation. We having a conversation, and the reason why y'all, you know what I'm saying, you want to have a conversation with me because I want to have a real conversation with you. Now, listen, we are talking explicitly about reparations. We've addressed reparations, you know what I'm saying, in terms of the federal government. Now, since 2020, we can recognize that Ghana, Nigeria, and a few other different West African countries also acknowledge their interplay within the slave trade. How do we engage that conversation about African people, you know what I'm saying, and their involvement with slavery without perpetuating them old black on black tropes, i.e., hey, Erika, you can't be mad that white people sold you because black people sold you too. And I ask again, how can we have a genuine conversation about African countries' involvement with enslavement of African Americans uniquely without it devolving into tropes about what white folks use to shut us up in America?
That's why we need great storytellers. We need great storytellers. They'll teach us how to have those conversations. We need new air to breathe, especially now. We need new worlds. We need new authors, new points of view, new discoveries, new strategies, new, not just versions of familiar tactics. I mean, what you're talking about is the imagination, which, biggest nation in the world, Riza always says that to me, and I said, that's true. And we're trying to reimagine how to do these things. And we may not have the correct vocabulary, but I do know that we are not only full of, the energy to speak emphatically about it. We will figure out how to have these conversations. But I know one thing: a nation needs to be held accountable to what it did to its citizens that it brought across the ocean. So we're not in Africa right now. We are African Americans talking about something that they can handle. And we will also have those conversations with the continent. One of the things they'll say is, well, where are you from? I'm like, I don't know. So here we go again. I know one thing. I was born here, and so are my parents, and they are owed the respect of any human being. And it starts with a nation that has branded itself as a nation of justice from sea to sea, from sea to shining sea.
Yes.
Not going to get it. We're not begging. We're not complaining. We are standing tall on the shoulders of our ancestors and saying it is our just due and figure it out. And that's why we did the documentary. And that's why Robin Ruth Simmons matters. And that's why um, the congressional movement toward talking about this, and however people want to support or look at that, needs to matter. But from locality to locality, which is really what's happening now, which is exciting, people are trying to address it. And in the next 50 years or so, I hope that it gets handled in a way that we can stand up and be proud that we were here. And certainly me, I may not be on this planet anymore, but you may be, and your children. And I did my part. All I'm going to say is I did my part. Look at Harriet Tubman. She did her part. She wasn't here to answer all the things, but I think that she would have something to say about all of this. But the most thing she would say is Black people have paid more than their fair share. And we're not talking about we're just pain and suffering. We're talking about the psychological damage,
Yes.
the pain and suffering, and they could never pay for that. But we are tired and struggling now when we should not be.
Yes, yes, yes. When I'm in the classroom usually or doing workshops, I like to tell the people that's in the audience that they're about to get a little ski taste of something they ain't never had before. And I like to use this concept that I call purposeful provocativeness, meaning that I recognize that sometimes the lessons can come out provocative, but there's a purpose to it. I want to ask you a question that's going to come out very provocative, but I'm just really sitting here and want to know your response, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a meme that has Paul Mooney on it, and I love this meme. It's one of my favorite. It's like really my favorite meme all time. It says that white people do not want to be blamed for what their ancestors did, but they sure as hell want to hold on to what their ancestors left for them. What that make you like? How do you feel about that statement?
They don't want to be blamed for what their ancestors did, but they wanted what?
White people do not want to be blamed for what their ancestors did, but they want to hold on to what their ancestors left for them.
Oh, ooh, or boom. That's what I say. That's real. That is what it is. You can't own one without claiming the other. You have to claim them both. There is a real disconnect. And let's just talk about, just very quickly, the mental illness of white superiority, because that's what we're talking about.
Yes, ma'am.
That's why reparations really is more for them than it is for us. Unyoke yourself from spinning around and twisting yourself inside out to create some kind of sense out of something that is absolute chaos theory. That's what it is. And so you can't have one without the other, and yet they keep having to go through this. And what you're doing is you're creating an inheritance for your families that they will have to deal with because you refuse to look at yourself and mind the dark reality. Come on, of what's.
Come on, Erika.
And we have to face it every day. They want us to face ourselves every day, and we do. But in stark comparison, they don't have to look at themselves. But I said they created the system. It is their system to destroy and dismantle. It is ours to push them to do it. But if we had the power, we would have done it by now. If we could have done it, we would have done it. It is
Yes.
something that white people have to say, you know what? I'm looking at all this, and it's in our hands. It's in our laps. What are we going to do about it? And what are you going to do about it?
What we gonna do about it? You know, hey, like we say, the old folks they say down south, you gonna barbecue or you gonna mildew. You know what I'm saying? You gonna sit there, you gonna do something. And what you just said really made me think of when I was in college and I came across Kwame Ture, aka Stokely Carmichael. Their brother said the Civil Rights Acts is not for black people; they're for white people. He said that black people been knowing we can drink out of their water fountain. White folks didn't know that we could drink out that water fountain. So they had to create a legislation and say, hey, white people, if just in case you don't know, black folks can drink out of that water fountain. He kept on going. He said, black folks been knowing that we can vote. The white people didn't know that we can vote. So they had to create a law that say, hey, white folks, them black folks over there, they can vote. So when Erika says that reparations is not really for us, it's for them, in many different instances, it's to be able to say, hey, listen, white people, those folks over there, they are not passive, docile beings. The way that you feel always already connected to being tarred and feathered and to being forced to quarter soldiers, and you ain't never did that, in the same way them folks over there feel spiritually moved based off of not only what was happening then, but what's going on right now. Hey, I ain't never went into a history classroom and told them, hey, guys, nobody born today was a British redcoat. And nobody born today was a part of the original members of 13 colonies. Therefore, forget all this. You never say that. You never say that. But for some reason, black people are chastised for being stuck in the past. See what I'm saying? When we start talking about Texan, they'll say, remember the Alamo in a minute. Hey, that's not seen as victim mentality.
Come on.
What you say, Erika? We looking to be victors, not victims. You said that earlier. We're looking to create narratives as victors and victory. And I just think that the way in which folks be lost in the sauce and how they understand black people, it makes it where you just get linked into everything. I just kind of passionately said this a minute ago. And it's
well, black people, we are a hero story. We're a hero story. We're not victims. We are prospering despite all that. People would say, well, you know, all these complaints. I said, you understand, with all those knees on our neck, still we rise. We rise. 13%, the biggest culture makers in American history, in world history. Who's made the whole world tap to our tune? From rock and roll to everything, to jazz, to hip hop, to all this. You look at
African diaspora, black folks in America,
No, that's real. That's real. And I'm sorry. That's a hero story. So we can talk about who we lost along the way, but the ones who survive and continue to connect, those people are not small players. They define and they change the whole game. And I like that you said, you know, about Tombstone is one of my favorite movies, and Kurt Russell is slapping Billy Bob Thornton on the thing, and he said, you gonna throw down, or you just gonna stand there and bleed? That's what we're saying. Are you gonna throw down, or you gonna stand there and bleed? Because right now you're bleeding out. Stem that tide, stem the bleeding, correct it for yourself, because that's the one thing we can't deliver, is deliver you from yourself. Deliver yourself. And it creates all sorts of wonderful opportunities. We should get happy about the opportunity that reparation brings, not just for African Americans and Black people, but for the world. We are supposed to be standing in proxy for what it means to be human in the greatest nation that humans ever created. And yet they still have not been able to bring themselves to rectify, apologize, and repair the people who helped them do it and create that kind of myth. It's a myth. It's not real until this happens.
Listen, listen, right? I'm trying to keep the time in mind. I know you got things to do, but listen,
We
I know.
talked, didn't we though? I'm here.
Yeah, we hear this right here. Something to come to mind though, because it's something that I know. Because you know how the internet does, and how, you know what I'm saying, different people that don't like you would do, right? So because we talked about it and we got into it and we kind of had this conversation in the backdrop a little bit, you mentioned being a surrogate to Hillary Clinton, a surrogate to, you know what I'm saying, very briefly to Kamala Harris. I told you about kind of how I received a little backlash from going to the White House. It's gonna make sense of how it's a conversation and what it has to do with reparations, but just curious, right? What were your thoughts or your experiences on having your sincerity or genuineness of the Black community be called to question? Like, what was your experience being called a sellout or being called a agent or being called? Talk to me, Erika.
Authenticity. What you're talking about is authenticity, and they never questioned my authenticity because they didn't know who I was. I was playing characters. I was not even a real person. So, however, I was rebranded in their eyes. I think they were connecting to the fact that I was actually speaking my own words and sort of getting their first look at who I was as a person. But you're different. You're coming as a person who is authentically themselves, telling them about not only your background, but how you came into this space as an advocate and activist, how education is important, where you taught. That's one of the reasons why I followed you on Instagram, is that I loved what you were saying. I learned so much from what you were doing. And then I really was tickled when they said we look like each other, because I said, oh, that's so great, because he does look like he'd be my nephew. And that's wonderful because you're so handsome. But the truth
Thank you.
that when you're doing something and you're relevant, then people will always have a criticism of that. If they don't think that you should be in a certain space, they had a criticism of John Lewis, who was a street warrior going into Congress. And that's just part of the game. I think when I say the game, meaning the game of life, you go in and it needs to be criticized. But I'm a warrior. I'm a warrior. I'm a I'm a woman king. I'm not afraid of what people say about me. I don't want to go to sleep at night saying that I didn't do everything I could do. And so if it's an opportunity to go into the White House and be invited there to bring the message to what we'd call, or they call back in the day, a king, like, Moses went to Pharaoh and said, let my people go. And they didn't come back and say, oh, you went to go see Pharaoh. Now you try to come back over here and tell us we got 10 commandments.
You sell out. Moses, you would sell out. You wouldn't got that from the folks.
Exactly.
I think that like, I get it. I feel like a part of me was like, dang, y'all doing me like that. But also a part of me was like, all right, I get it. I can recognize I have a undergraduate degree in African American studies. I know there's a long legacy of different freedom fighters and revolutionaries going into the system to fight against the system and end up getting eaten by it, and then you make it where you worry of it. So I feel like when I talk to you, I can hear like the wisdoms, you know what I'm saying, it's coming off you, you know what I'm saying, coming off your breath, you feel me? So I just want to ask you for some advice. You know what I'm saying? I feel like you didn't gave it to me. You know what I'm saying? You pretty much then told me, hey, Lee, it's part of the game. If you're going to do this, do it then. If you're not going to do it, then go over there.
Well, knowledge also, it hurts. I don't want to be somebody to say that I'm a detriment to them, or I'm selling out, or I'm inauthentic. But I think that I also look at what people uphold as being authentic and keeping it real. And these are people who are often very dangerous to the community. And so you question me and what I do every day. And here I am putting myself out there, and no one's paying me for it. No one's paying you for it. It's just what you've chosen to do as a commitment to not only the philosophy and that you're a philosopher. That's what you are. But also your commitment to the people and also to being human. They can have a conversation about whether you're authentic. But to me, I want to say anybody who's charging me should look at whether they are authentic. Because if you have time to question my, intention, then you should check yours. They're not spending that time leveraging that type of criticism to the people who really need to be put in check. And they're often rarely in the community you're talking about. But it does happen, and it's fine to have that criticism. But I have to just say, first of all, I'm going to say it hurts, and I'm human. And there's nothing wrong with me sort of saying, and I want to be liked. But if I wanted to be really liked, I wouldn't be doing this type of work. If I wanted to be liked,
Amen.
popularity versus impact. I may never be as popular, but I hope to have impact once these old bones go to rest.
Purpose of a popularity. And Erika, you ain't number like 41, 42, right? You keep on talking about,
53, baby, every year that. What? Hello. Let me see. Let me show you my muscle. No, it's gone. Whatever. So here's the good news. Got to give shout out to my the yarn locks, fantasy locks braider, who also did the Maxine Shaw famous new locks, Deborah Hare Bay. People are so nice to keep me, in the loop and looking kind of funky and spunky. But where I'm tired and where I'm old is in sometime in my spirit. It's exhausting, and you want to be. You want some change is a bad word. When did that happen? When did that happen? That change is a bad word, and change makers are people who are trying to get some change. But that's how it is. I also believe that there's a lot of bots out there that create dissension, and people feed the bots by agreeing with them. But I've gotten so much love, mostly from people, so much support. And I try to engage the people who don't agree with me to say, well, I understand, just keep it respectful for everybody here on the platform. And that's all I ask for. If you're going to make a comment, try to make some sense of it. Educate yourself. Don't ask things that you could Google. Don't waste people's time. Come in here and engage with power. I'm not here to answer basic questions. I'm here to have a conversation and in a community conversation. But I'm not perfect. So if I make mistakes, please believe that I certainly don't mean to make them on their time. But it's a tough thing. And by the way, Robin Bruce Simmons talks a lot about that. And every new leader in the space has to acknowledge that Martin Luther King, when he got murdered, was disliked by most people in America, and especially African Americans. And yet he was a young man who did not see 40. And how young John Lewis was when he wrote the letter to Martin Luther King, the boy from Troy, asking to be involved. He was 17, 18. And so there's a long lead time for getting exhausted and getting burned out. But you have to find, like Superman, I often go to the references of go to the sun and regain your power. Your power doesn't come from people regarding us highly. It comes from being able to take the shadow and the darkness. And as I say, glow in the dark. Glow in the dark. Find your tribe. Find people out there with you, and huddle up and keep it moving.
Yes, definitely. What are some two questions actually. What are some takeaways that you had at the end of the film, and what are some takeaways you hope for other people to have after they're done watching the film?
Well, obviously, I want them to know more about what reparations in a modern day sense means, even if they don't feel like what Robin did was reparations, because people have said that. They're seeing a version of it. And I think that, like me, it's time for people to take ownership of educating themselves about the subject. And I don't have to join or endorse the players who've committed themselves to it, but I do have to know more about it. And so if we're going to sustain this democracy, we must deliver racial redress and equality. And after the plague, I hope people saw that reparations isn't a bridge too far. Here we are in another time as architects of the third Reconstruction, as Bishop Barber and the Poor People's Campaign talks about. And you must see yourself as a builder. And I hope that they come away feeling inspired and energized by the fact that this woman who knew nothing about that did something in American history that mattered, but also go to see what else she's done. There's all sorts of things like this happening all over. It's time for us to embrace it. And that's what I see. That there is movement, and stop just complaining, oh, there ain't this and everybody's like this and no one wants don't do that. It's that's ignorance and fear that's pushing you to put everybody underneath the same, swipe of like, oh, they're all corrupt. No, they're not. You get your water comes out of a tap because somebody put it there. Whether it's clean or not, we can talk about that. But every day people make moves toward us as
to be able to do what we do.
Just living day to day.
Yeah. Hey, well, listen, I will be to everybody watching, I will be putting information about where you can go watch this documentary into the description. Education is elevation. I hope y'all really enjoyed this conversation, because I know I have. Erika, I'm hoping to stay in touch with you. Listen, anytime you need conscious lead, listen, I'm just a click away, email away, DM away.
The same to you too. We're friends and now we're family. Now I've met someone who looks like me, and we probably are related. That's a good thing. I want to tell everybody to go to bigpaybackmovie.com if they want to see or hear more about it. And also to the PBS app. Check that out. It's free. You can watch the film. Yeah, watch free on PBS. The Big Payback is what it's called. Shout out to Ben Arnon and Zan Parker and Whitney Dow, who's my co-director, and to all the people who have embraced this film and helped us make it. Obviously, Evanston, Illinois, they're still doing the work there. But the people who came out, white and black, who wanted to be in the film, which, by the way, we need to talk more about white people who were maybe hesitant to tell their real thoughts and feelings. The few that came out that did that, we thank them and appreciate that. And everybody who educated us, who maybe didn't make the cut, thank you so much. And I'm just going to keep pushing. That's all there's to it.
Yes. It's been real, y'all. Until next time, education is elevation, research over me search, and make sure you're saying what you mean and meaning what you say. You know what I'm saying? A lot of times it's not really what you say, it's what can be justified with your words. So if you're meaning what you're saying and saying what you mean, you're going to be able to defend those and be always making sure what can be justified with the words you said is something that is not in opposition to you. You know what I'm saying? Facts over feelings, and it's been